everyone. Welcome to this week's edition of Fair Game with Tom Johnson. Except this week, Tom is not with us, so we have three special guests. We have Councilmember Sue Kempf, our City Manager Dave Kiff, and our City Attorney Megan Garibaldi. So they will be joining us. And today we're going to focus this week's show on how we are addressing visitor impacts, which I think we all agree is the number one priority, probably aside from public safety, which is our top priority. But we are all feeling how many people are coming to the beach and this summer, and it's part of what is living in Laguna Beach, and I think it's a complicated issue that's based on a lot of coastal act requirement laws. But it's one that we also can, improve. And so the goal is to kind of walk through what are the legal constraints that we are dealing with as it relates to managing the impacts of visitors. We'll start there with our city attorney, and then we're going to go to our city manager to give us kind of a high level overview of what are we doing in terms of enforcement and other mechanisms to deal with the impact of visitors. And then we're going to, go to Council Member Kempf, who's been very involved with this issue since joining the council, and talk about what's happening at the ground level, especially because she just did a ride along with one of our park rangers, and then we'll have a free flowing discussion on this topic that I know is top of mind to so many people. So let's start with our city attorney. So Megan, can you explain what it means? A lot of people talk about the idea that why can't we just stop so many people from coming to the beach. Can you explain why we're not allowed to do that, and maybe, step back and talk about what the Coastal Act is and how that applies in the city of Laguna Beach?
Sure, thanks, Mr. Mayor. We'll start with what the Coastal Act is, which it's a state law. It really started as a voter initiative in the early 70s, and now is administered through the Coastal Commission today. The the city of Laguna Beach, almost the entire city is in the coastal zone, which means that when we, as a city, take action that can generate development, and development doesn't just mean building something. It means changing a use, intensifying a use, lessening a use, any of those things. So a lot of stuff qualifies as development, and anything that qualifies as development is going to require a coastal development permit or in the coastal zone, or require compliance with our certified local coastal program. As a result, we have a lot of restrictions on our ability to take action in the city. So we have to comply with the Coastal Act first, before we can implement certain changes. The Coastal Act means also that everybody in California is entitled to the right to access the coast, not just if you live near it.
Got it. And so, for example, why can't we, there's one zone in Laguna, the quiet zone by Mozambique, where there is some form of resident only parking. Why can't we have resident only parking for the whole city? Has this been I know the answer to this, but has this been pursued? Because I think we would all want to do it. And what is the reason why we're not able to do that? Because that would make residents' lives a lot easier, especially during the summer months.
Definitely would. And parking is something that is very clearly um, controlled and regulated by the Coastal Act. So for parking restrictions that may have existed pre-Coastal Act, that's a different thing. For restrictions that are today, it would have to comply with our certified local coastal program, or we would be required to do a coastal development permit to make those restrictions. In our case, we have existing restrictions that prohibit us from imposing resident only parking requirements throughout the city, under our LCP.
And I believe we've talked to them about this in the past of changing that, but there really is no precedent of any them allowing any coastal city to allow for resident only parking, especially during the busy beach times, because their whole point is that visitors have a right to park in neighborhoods to go to the beach.
Yeah, so the Coastal Commission's perspective is very much about access to the beach, and restricting parking to resident only access to the Coastal Commission means restricting the ability for others to come in and visit the beach because they won't have somewhere to park.
Got it. Okay. And then we also hear a lot from residents, okay, why don't you just increase the rates substantially for parking? And again, I think that is something that we would be all in on because we love the idea of trying to absorb the impacts of visitors where we have to pay for public safety and different resources. Can you explain how, the parking rates are established in town and what the limits of the Coastal Act imposes on us?
Yeah, absolutely. Our parking rates are also subject to the Coastal Act, and so again, we can't just set rates without a CDP issuance or Coastal Commission authority. And Coastal Commission is very focused on affordable accessibility, not just accessibility. So we can't have parking rates that would be preventative to folks coming to town, parking near the beach and going to the beach. And so Coastal Commission weighs in on our parking rates as a result. So we are not able to just by ourselves without Coastal Commission oversight or participation set our parking rates.
Got it. And then I know one thing that I've heard, I was walking to the beach the other day and someone said, why don't we have paid parking in South Laguna along PCH? And again, that's something that I think we need. And I think the council said that we needed, where we are currently working on getting that through Coastal Commission, right? Where we can charge the same rates that we're charging elsewhere in town. Is that right? And can you update us on those efforts?
We've talked to Coastal Commission about that, so we're having discussions about it. Um, the discussions with Coastal about parking, it's a discussion, and so we have to sort of not only we have to advance coastal interests in making those arguments. I think there's a good argument that um, that requiring paid parking there actually helps with access because it requires turnover of those parking spots. And so we're trying to make those arguments with Coastal now.
Good, because that's an opportunity for us to increase revenue from visitors, which can help us, which we can put towards more enforcement and other, ways to help our general fund. So that's great. So I think that's a good overview of the Coastal Act and just the kind of the rules of the game that we are playing within. And so, with that, let's go to our city manager and talk about what we are doing in terms of enforcement. I know we added two park rangers to our budget that was approved. And so, can you talk about, what we're doing in terms of enforcement and the impacts of that, what we're seeing in terms of the data?
Sure. As you're noting, Alex, we now have 10 park rangers, and these are our positions that are just below a police officer position. So, in other words, they won't carry a weapon they won't carry a gun, but they can enforce all the different quality of life ordinances and codes that we have in place in Laguna Beach. And those are everywhere from drinking on the beach, dogs off leash, dogs on the beach at the wrong hours. Um, they'll do some loud exhaust work. They'll do parking work. And the other thing they do, they're kind of ambassadors out there. They'll issue a lot of warnings, but they'll also issue a lot of tickets. And as you're noting, Alex, one of the things we've been trying to do more of is to explain to our residents both the regulations and our enforcement of them. And I'll give you just some numbers. When we compare 2025 to last year, 2024, we're already up about 17% in terms of the amount of enforcement actions, calls for service. Parking is one area we're up even more. We have 19% more parking citations issued. To date, that means 13,000 different tickets. So people think we're not doing parking enforcement. We are 13,000 times. Another one we've ramped up a lot is loud exhaust citation. So 168 already this year, where this time last year we had 44. And then we do drinking in public, as I noted. We're up to 700 or 699 citations in 2025. This time last year, we were at 331. So those two new enforcement personnel are helping with that, but so is a larger approach by the police department to focus on the quality of life issues that we hear about from our residents, but also at the same time not make, Laguna Beach will still be a welcoming community. So we won't stop doing that, but we want people to enjoy the town and behave while they're here.
Absolutely. And just because we've increased it, that doesn't mean that we're gonna, just sort of rest on our laurels and not keep trying to improve. I know an example of that is parking enforcement. That's something that we've looked at. Can we outsource that and do it in a more cost-effective way and achieve more enforcement? And I know there's a legal issue with that. We're not a charter city, so that's something that we're looking into. So I think that we made a lot. The chart will be shown on the screen when you're watching this, but We made some progress, and I think we'll continue working on enforcement. So we appreciate the work of the police department there. Um, and Dave, okay, so that's I think that's at a high level what we're seeing. So Sue, you recently, so you've been since you were on the council, you've put together the cities. What was the plan that you put together? I think in like 2022. What was that called?
Well, we did this plan called the Neighborhood and Environmental Protection Plan. It was in response to the number of people that we had coming into town during the pandemic. If you recall, there wasn't anything to do, so we got inundated with people both at the beaches and at the trails. And so we instituted that ban on single-use plastics. Was the genesis of the park rangers and why we started ramping up for park rangers and other things, signage and docents at the trails and to try to educate people. So, yeah, that was the start of it. And I went on a ride along on Sunday with Park Ranger Oscar Perez. And first of all, I couldn't have been more impressed with him as a professional. His approach to people, the way he handles things, he's firm, knows what to look for. It was very educational. And so we spent our time on Sunday. We went to a number of beaches, including Aliso. We went to some of the Cove beaches. We also went through Heisler. And I watched how he operates. He basically goes up and talks to people. Hi, I'm the park ranger. There's no smoking here, and there's no drinking on the beach, but he has really good approach. And what it's kind of interesting the amount they know about behavior of people coming to town. So they'll do like a pass at the beaches. They'll run through a pass. Maybe they'll go on a 1 or 2 o'clock, but they'll go back later in the afternoon, and that's when the preponderance of the drinking is evident. And they write
Hmm.
the most number of citations during that time. Um, so, out of those 4 hours I spent with him, I really learned a lot. And I wrote kind of a list of things that I think, and I sent to Dave and I sent to Megan and some of the other departments, Public Works, Marine Safety, the Police Department, on things that I think we could do better next year. That are some are a little bit longer range, some are have legal implications, and we have to talk to our Madam City Attorney about that.
Hmm.
But I think, in terms of ongoing improvements and planning for the busy time, we know that July is always our worst month because there's no school. And in July is when residents get the most worked up about visitor impacts, and understandably. So I've been, what kind of prompted me to do this was not only our statistics, which I think are quite exceptional, as Dave outlined, but the other thing is for like the last 3 weeks, I've been going around town picking up trash. And believe it or not, trash can be very informative. It can tell you we don't have enough trash cans, but it can also tell you, for example, oh, at Heisler Park on the outlook, where you could stand to look out with these little outlook posts, people smoke there while they're looking around, or they'll smoke back in the picnic areas because they're barbecuing something and they can smoke back there and they think that they won't get caught. But our park rangers do catch people and they do cite them. But so anyway, it's an interesting experience
Yeah,
and
and so
help.
Sue, are there any? I think that doing, seeing things from because we can talk about policy, at a high level, but really the only way to understand the impacts of policy or to see it at the ground level, when you're doing a ride along or something like you did. Are there any, high level recommendations that you want to share from your experience? I know you were mentioning something about beach times and the differences there. Are there anything that you want to share of what potential
Uh,
next steps could be?
I mean, I won't go into all of them, but one thing I noticed in particular is, we have these easy ups on the beach. They take up a lot of room. And it also takes a lot of time for the park rangers because we don't allow 10 by 10s. And it takes a lot of time for the park rangers to deal with just the easy ups alone. They have to approach the people, so you have to shrink them down. You can't really shrink them down very gracefully. It doesn't really work very well. So that's one thing they're spending an inordinate amount of time on. And another thing is our signage. We have these old brown signs, and Dave is working on that with his staff. But you're just when you're walking up to a beach and you see one of our brown signs, it doesn't get your attention. There's a lot of words on there. The order's all wrong. And so we're working on a temporary signage program this year, which will be going up soon. Maybe Dave can talk more about that. But longer term, we want to work. That's another thing we need to work on.
Good.
Um, the trash collection, I think, we do a pretty good job on that. But there are other things I think that have coastal commission, perhaps implications or discussions that we will talk about in the fall. I also think, I'm kind of a fan of drone policing. I was talking to Dave about this.
Mhm.
Maybe the drones we could have the drones go over the beaches in the evenings, later at night when we start to have these problems. We
Yeah,
do have significant fines, and when we catch people, we are going to fine them, and we have been fining them. So there's a lot of things like that, but I think they're all doable, and I think some will be quite helpful.
good. And I know you and the city manager, and I think Councilmember Orgill, as well as other city staff, participated in a meeting in with Woods Cove residents. And so I think maybe I'll send this question to Dave. So if Sue and I are talking about our experiences as residents, Sue's also talking about the experience, doing a ride along. If residents have ideas or feedback, or maybe areas where they see a lack of enforcement, of course they can always reach out to you and the city council. Um, Right. So I guess my question, Dave, is how should residents report their concerns, and how do we make sure that we are, as we continue to, work on continuous improvement in terms of our enforcement? Because we're never going to be able to be at 100% enforcement, but what we can do is continue improving to get there. How do you recommend, Dave, that residents reach out to share their feedback and to help us inform our strategy as it relates to policies and enforcement resources?
Sure, two good ways. One, everybody should download Ask Laguna, the app. It sounds like it's a question app, but it's really a report, let's call it a quality of life nuisance, whether you see graffiti or overflowing trash or something like that that's more stable. Send that into Ask Laguna, and if you download it on your phone, take a picture of it, we'll know where it came from, geolocated, and then that's responded to daily. So 7 days of the week, it's monitored. So sometimes that's a much faster way to get a complaint in, either then going through city council or through me, although you can do that too. And then the second one is to call the police non-emergency line. And those are for more active violations. If you see drinking on the beach or loud music or someone's being disruptive. Now, we may not be able to get there right away, but what we can do is log it. We'll get there soon. And then we can also use that to see where trends are. If we get enough complaints from a certain area, we'll spend a little bit more time there to try to address the problem. So that number is, of course, 949-497-0701. Again, 497-0701. That's the non-emergency line. Always call 911 an emergency, but use that other line to report things that you see day to day, and then use the Ask Laguna app.
And Dave, with Ask Laguna, does that give you a response when your complaint has been addressed?
It does. It'll ping you when
Good.
your complaint came in, and it'll tell you when it's been addressed. And I know everybody on this call uses it a lot. They call me a super user of it because it's such an easy way to tell the staff who's directly responsible for something, cuts out all the middle persons and gets right to them.
Maybe something going forward where we could see if we get monthly reports on, that and what the calls are and the
Yeah,
response time and all that, just to help us inform our resource allocation as it relates to the budget or perhaps policy recommendations. And I think we should continue emphasizing that. So I think it's a great program.
great.
So I think, unless anyone has something to add, I think this is a great conversation. I do think, we always have room to improve in government. And our goal here is there's not really an easy solution for dealing with the impact of visitors. It's something that we all feel as residents, and really, as we said at the beginning of the call, it's a complicated legal environment that we're operating under in the Coastal Act. And so all we can do is be creative and try our best and deploy as many resources as we can to mitigate the impact of visitors and improve quality of life for residents. So I appreciate, everyone on this call's work on this issue. And I think it's something the council is going to continue prioritizing, because the reason why we all love living in Laguna Beach is why people want to come visit it, and so that's not going to change anytime soon. So again, it's a complex issue, and appreciate the thoughtful solutions here, and we can always do better. So please share any ideas or feedback as we look to continue, improving on these important issues. So I think we are going to be signing off now. And thanks everyone for your time. Thanks for tuning in to Fair Game Laguna.
Thanks.
Good to
Thanks,
see
Mary.
everybody.
One more update that I just wanted to share with our listeners, and I have our city attorney still here about we have two recent appeals to the Coastal Commission, so it's kind of appropriate. We were just talking about the Coastal Commission's impact, and one of them was about the approval of a fire station in South Laguna, and then the second one was on the promenade. And so, Megan, could you briefly explain, what these actions were locally, and then what these appeals were, and what are the next steps of that?
Sure. So they're in mid-June on I think both actions were actually June 11th. The city council had took action on two separate projects. One was the promenade, which related to the design of the promenade, and then the closure, the more permanent closure of Lower Forest. And then the second issue, separate project, was Fire Station number 4. Both of those projects, we got notice at I think probably the very beginning of July, that both of those projects have been appealed to the Coastal Commission. What an appeal to the Coastal Commission looks like is really kind of a two-step process. So the first step is what they call substantial issue. So coastal staff looks at the appeals, and based on the contentions in the appeals, determines if there is substantial issue and makes a recommendation to the Coastal Commission as to whether or not to find substantial issue. If there's no substantial issue finding, then the appeal is effectively over. If there is a substantial issue finding, then the merits of that appeal go to the Coastal Commission at a later time for the Coastal Commission to review the project to determine if the project has implications on coastal resources, is in compliance with the city's certified local coastal program, stuff like that.
Okay, and so I think that within the window, we will have the substantial issue hearings with the Coastal Commission either in August or September, right? So we will keep people updated on that.
Yeah, so the Coastal Commission has a set amount of time to consider the substantial issue. And so I think we think that that time period runs in early September.
Okay. Well, it's disappointing on both fronts, especially as relates to, the fire station, which is desperately needed. And it's been more than 50 years since we built a fire station. And it seems like, on both those issues, it's good that at the council level, we made our decisions based off of the findings under the Coastal Act. And so we hope that the Coastal Commission will, we'll look at that evidence and find there's no substantial issue, but we will keep everyone updated as these are both important projects for our community. So appreciate the update, Madam City Attorney.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor.